Antifa is back in Portland, starting fires, attacking the courthouse, and here we go again. The other night, they set fire to the Mark O. Hatfield Courthouse. Federal officers had to come out, try and put the fire out, make several arrests, and it is very reminiscent of last year. The problem never stopped. Autonomous zones still exist. Yet for some reason, we are told over and over and over again that the biggest threat facing this country is the far right and white terror. And I thought about this. You know what? I think it's fair to say that the far right thing is probably wrong. I do think there are dangerous elements of the far right, and it is a big threat. Don't get me wrong. Extremism, regardless of what faction it belongs to, is a problem. I do like the idea of our national security agencies, our federal law enforcement, stopping extremists on the far right. But to act like that is the epitome of the problems we face, or the only thing we should care about, it's just flat wrong. And it's all the media wants to drive home. They are operating essentially to protect the far left extremists. And outside of the story, I want to talk to you about Portland and Antifa, and we'll give you an update on what they're doing in the news. But I want to show you a chart which definitively proves the far left is the bigger threat. It's the bigger threat. Now, don't get me wrong. It's an opinion, right? Who's the biggest threat? It's an opinion, I suppose. But I do think that in terms of sustained long-term damage, the far left is more dangerous, destructive, and destabilizing than the far right. When you have lone gunmen, far right lunatics, we can track those people down. The FBI can arrest them. But when you have large collectives on the far left who are protected by the media, how do you stop a cultural shift which favors violence and destruction? And I'm going to show you the graphs to prove it. Before that, though, let's talk about what's going on in Portland. The Daily Mail reports Portland burns again. Federal agents shoot tear gas at Antifa protesters, setting fire to American flags and smashing windows outside a boarded up courthouse. They say Antifa protesters have burned American flags, clashed with police outside of the federal courthouse in Portland. The ugly scenes occurred Thursday evening as dozens of the far left protesters, you mean rioters, assembled in the area for a demonstration against immigration and customs enforcement. The courthouse has already been boarded up with plywood after sustaining damage during destructive protests last summer. But shocking video shared to Twitter shows all remaining uncovered windows were smashed during the latest demonstration. Quote, anti-ICE protesters gather. A few of the remaining uncovered windows have been broken. An American flag burns in front of the door, local journalist Garrison Davis wrote beneath a video shared on Twitter. Several other demonstrators set fire to the plywood outside the building, prompting federal agents to deploy tear gas and smoke bombs in a bid to push the protesters back towards the park. Earlier in the day, Antifa activists attempted to break into a Chase bank where a security guard pulled a gun on the rioters, they say protesters. The demonstrators were targeting those funding a controversial oil pipeline between the Canadian province of Alberta to Superior, Wisconsin. I'd like to point something out. You have the far left consistently engaging in these violent and destructive behaviors, and we have videos and photos of it consistently for a long time. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like this is the end of the world or what they're doing is quite literally dropping a nuke or something, but it's bad. Yet we're told by, say, Nadler, Antifa's a myth. For 100 days, we see the violence. They blame Trump for it. They say Trump's escalating by having the police there. They blame everyone but themselves. They would tell you to deny what you see with your eyes and your ears. Now listen, there are Twitter videos that are fake news. There are people who take photos from conflicts and claim it's from one place, but it's really of another. We got to be careful of the manipulations. But when you have news article after news article explaining the far left is violent and destructive, and then you hear from Democrats, it's a myth, it's a lie, it's not true. The far right's worse. When you hear it from the feds, you have to wonder what their true agenda and their true motives are. We were told that it was Donald Trump's America when they were smashing up Portland, and that they would stop once Joe Biden got in. And there was a good argument. Here's the argument. Basically, you could argue that it would get better under Joe Biden because these people just hated Trump and then they'll lose all their broad support when Trump is gone. Or you could argue that it was going to get worse under Biden because he is pathetic and weak and can't do anything to stop it. And that seems to be what's happening. Joe Biden can't do anything. He's a pathetic leader. He's not strong enough. That's just the reality. While Donald Trump may have been a bit chaotic and disruptive, I don't think anybody would. I think the guy was easily defined as strong, whether you're happy with how he used that strength or not. I'm sure the left tribalists will say, no, he was a weak president just for the sake of not liking the guy. But Trump was a strong guy. He pushed on people. He yelled a lot. He took over the space. He sucked the air out of the room. He sent in the feds. Perhaps not strong enough, though. He could have invoked the Insurrection Act. I'm not saying it was a good idea. He could have sent in some kind of larger federal presence, and he was restrained because he wasn't the fascist they said he was. They say, here we go. We have some photos of the police moving through the area. According to Davis, the feds marched further into the streets of downtown Portland while firing off chemical weapons and projectiles. A few of their pepper ball and 40-millimeter launchers appeared to malfunction. He claimed the agents were aggressive and that the air was thick with smoke. At least one person has been arrested. In a tweet last night, Portland police said it was bracing for yet more unrest over the weekend. We are aware of events planned tomorrow and this weekend in which people plan to gather and demonstrate. Demonstration liaison officers are available to work with community members organizing these events. Last summer in Portland, Black Lives Matter marches began in the wake of George Floyd's death, but the demonstration soon became co-opted by far-left agitators. Night after night, they clashed with law enforcement officials who often declared riots. But I will point out, I do not believe you are absolved of responsibility while you shield the extremists who engage in the violent riotous acts. We saw the wall of moms. Not every single person in that wall was a mother, mind you. It was just a lot of women, many of which were mothers. And they provided a linking. They linked arms and provided a shield for those that would engage in the most extreme acts of violence. Now, listen, I can actually sympathize with these extremists. I absolutely can. I'm just, particularly anti-violence and anti-war. And I don't think what they're doing is going to make the problems go away. I think it'll make the problems worse. But I understand that anger, the anger at the government, especially now Joe Biden, especially with Donald Trump's foreign policy and John Bolton. I totally get it. Now, the problem with Trump was the media just would not shut up. It's like, don't make me say something that's not true. You'll force me to defend the guy. Now, it's similar with Joe Biden now on some things. I still really detest the man. But I think if he does something good, I'm going to give him credit for it. That's just the way it's going to be. But I understand that anger. Watching Biden push for gun control, watching him try to take away the rights of the individual, watching him bomb Syria, and I'm not happy with it. And Trump, you can criticize for very similar things. The difference here is that the establishment is protecting Joe Biden. So while the media was lying about Trump, they're lying about Joe Biden. And I need only the record be clear. And then you can criticize them for whatever you need to criticize them for. Black Lives Matter. It was not taken over by agitators. The Black Lives Matter groups were as equally as agitatious or other, whatever the word is. I purposely choosing a silly word. They say there were at least 100 consecutive nights of unrest in the city. The violence has continued into this year. In January, Antifa protesters, rioters, went on a destructive rampage following Biden's inauguration. See, didn't matter who was the president. Biden had previously appeared to downplay Antifa, describing the group as an idea. Congratulations. All of you who voted for this weak and spineless, corrupt monster in Joe Biden. Congratulations. He will not solve these problems. President Biden condemned protests and violence on the far right and far left before he was president. A Fox News journalist stated to White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki after the January clash. Wait, what? President Biden condemned a Fox News journalist said to the White House Press Secretary? That's interesting. Why haven't we had... Oh, I see. You're talking about Trump. Why haven't we heard anything directly from him about the riots in Portland and the Pacific Northwest since he was inaugurated? I see what he's saying. Joe Biden, before he became president, he was complaining about this, blaming Trump for it. President Biden condemns violence and any violence in the strongest possible terms. Peaceful protests are a cornerstone of our democracy, but smashing windows is not protesting and neither is looting. And actions like these are totally unacceptable, she continued. Actions like these are totally unacceptable, and anyone who committed a crime should be prosecuted to the fullest extent. Thank you, Jen Psaki. I agree. I'm not going to drag her for saying what needs to be said. I will give her the praise for saying the right thing. Well, let's get it done. I just don't think Biden is the person who will get it done. And I think it's actually only going to get worse. And I'll explain why. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to November 1st, 2018. CNN's Don Lemon doubles down on the claim that white men are the biggest terror threat. It might surprise you, my friends, that I will tell you Don Lemon is correct. That's right. Now you can call him bigoted. You can call him racist. You can say he's profiling. Okay. But hold on. Hear me out. Before you get angry and then you say, hold on, Tim, what are you talking about? Hold on. Have you ever stopped to consider the political ideology of these white men and who are the real biggest terror threat? My friends, it is Antifa. Now, what does he mean by biggest? I don't know. I suppose you could have an argument about what biggest really means. For certain, there are far right elements, these extremists who do dangerous, horrific things, atrocities, committing tragedies, and it's bad. I wouldn't say it's the biggest threat because we can stop them, because we do stop them. And while they do engage in very serious acts, which results in lots of death, periodically, I would not say that's the biggest threat. To me, the biggest threat is one that strikes at the core of our institution, seeks to upend our justice system, terrifying jurors in the now George Floyd trial, fearing that their homes will be attacked by the far left if they speak up. If someone finds out they're simply a juror, the terrorist will attack them. People, for the most part, I would say, are concerned about far right extremism, but on a day-to-day basis, it doesn't really faze them. People are absolutely pinned down and mortified over the threats of cancel culture. You see, it's a lower tier thing. So it's not nearly as deadly. I would say that's fair. But it is violent. It is destructive. It has caused billions of dollars worth of damage. And it can ruin your life. That's scary. That's scary to a lot of people. So Don Lemon was right. And I'll show you why. Zach Goldberg tweeted, between 2016 and 2020, white liberals became slightly but significantly less likely to say that political violence is not at all justified, while white conservatives became significantly more likely to give this response. To clarify, they say, how much do you feel it is justified for people to use violence to pursue their political goals in this country? It can be confusing, but put it simply, the percent of those who said it is not at all justified to use violence went down among white liberals by about 5%. Among white moderates, it went down around 2%, but among white conservatives, it went up more than 7%. This means since 2016 to 2020, there are more conservatives saying it is not at all justified to use violence to reach your political goals. White liberals, less people are willing to say that. To clarify again, white liberals believe they are justified in using violence to get what they want. Zach says by party, we see a small drop among Democrats and slightly larger increase among Republicans. Republicans have become substantially less likely, relative, to disagree with political violence. And Democrats have become more. I'm sorry, that's the same. He accidentally posted the same graph. He says virtually all of the decrease among Dems is attributed to white Democrats. Among Asian Democrats, more people are saying don't use violence. But I will tell you this. There are a lot of Asian Democrats who seem to be okay with political violence. There are 68% of Asian Democrats say not at all justified using violence. 83% of white Democrats say not at all. So there are more minority Democrats who seem to think violence is okay compared to the white Democrats. But the white Democrats are coming on board. He goes on to say this. Wow. Didn't initially realize how big the drop was among very liberal whites. And there's the issue. Among the very liberal, which I'm assuming basically means far left, from 86 to 66.5, a 20% drop from 2016 to 2020. These people were polled. And they outright are saying that many of their views have changed. And they think they are entitled to use violence to get what they want. And when you look at the very conservative, what's supposed to be the far right, it's an increase of 2.5%. People saying it is not at all justified. They do not at all feel justified for people to use violence to pursue their political goals. So what's the real threat? Maybe it's not literally white men, but it's certainly far leftists who are white more so than many other groups. The far left, substantially more likely. And the reason why I say Don Lemon was correct, but for the wrong reasons, is that there's substantially less Asians in this country, substantially less Latinos, substantially less African Americans, and substantially more white liberals, a much larger faction by a factor of 10 to 1 in some of these circumstances. So although you may see among Asian Democrats, more of them feel violence is justified, white liberals, they are more likely to say that they feel to a certain extent justified. It doesn't mean, now I want to clarify as well, it doesn't mean they're saying they feel absolutely justified. It just says not at all. So there could be somewhat justified And they answer that as well. Long story short, it looks like what we're seeing is that there are people on the left who now believe violence is okay. It's obvious by what we saw with Antifa in Portland. It's obvious by what we're seeing at the George Floyd Memorial in Minneapolis, where someone was just shot and killed, and they've turned it into an autonomous zone. This Twitter user says, new post using election studies data reported attitudes about how justified political violence is desegregated. How much do you feel it is justified for people to use violence to pursue their political goals in this country? Interestingly, among Democrats, there's a lot more saying it is. Republicans, a lot less saying it is. Independents, more than Republicans. Men, more than women. White people, actually substantially less than Black, Hispanic, or Asians. But that's the clarification I'll make. It seems that that minorities in this country are more likely to say violence is justified, but there's substantially less of them. I don't actually care to blame white men for the most part. I think it's silly. I think we simply say a crime is a crime. If you commit it, you commit it. We don't need to profile people. We need to profile bad ideas and dangerous individuals. And it seems like far leftists have a higher propensity for violence at this point, or a willingness to commit it, as opposed to any other group. So if you want to target someone, I don't think race comes into the play, or even gender. I think ideology is the bigger shift. Among the very liberal, that's the biggest jump. That includes women, that includes Asians, Hispanics, Black people, white people, whatever. So the real issue, and perhaps I'm being a little hyperbolic when I say white men, is that the far left is becoming emboldened. Republicans don't like political violence. Around 90% saying not at all justified. Among Democrats, around 78% not at all justified. That's scary. Asians are the largest faction of those thinking it is a great deal justified. Wow. That's kind of scary. What's the narrative we get from the media, though, my friends? From Forbes, white supremacist domestic terrorists pose biggest threat of lethal violence this election, DHS assessment finds. No, maybe that's fair. I think so. You can consider a few things. First, lethal violence. Right. The far left is engaging in low tier terror, smashing windows, starting fires, and beating people to force subjugation. The far right extremists we see take guns and go do horrifying things. Okay, so maybe. I also think it's not necessarily fair to say far right for many of these people, because mentally unwell tends to be the biggest factor in this. But for the sake of argument, we'll just say, okay, fine. Lethal violence. Sure. White supremacists more likely to engage in lethal violence. To me, that's not the biggest threat. I certainly think it's horrifying, because I think life is inherently one of the most valuable things that there is. But the biggest threat is how many people will die if, say, communists took over. And I'm not necessarily saying that I think communists are going to take over. I'm just saying leftist ideology is infinitely more dangerous when it takes power, when it disrupts the economy, when it takes people's jobs, when it locks everything down, and it encourages street violence. That's substantially worse than, in the long run, than, say, one individual. They're both bad. They both need to be stopped. And there should be certain priorities for, more far right extremism, whatever that really means, than we would typically see with leftist protests. You don't need all that much to stop a protest from getting violent. You need only enforce the law. The problem is they're not doing it. They're not going out in Portland and just grabbing everybody and arresting them, I suppose, because it just doesn't stick. It doesn't work. In Portland, there was a federal prosecutor quietly dismissing felony charges and misdemeanor charges against anti-fascist, or I shouldn't say that, I should say Antifa types, who are getting arrested. 31 or some odd of over like 100 were dismissed, something like that. Why is that? Why are they getting away with this? I wonder if it serves an agenda. Why under Joe Biden is this still happening and not being taken care of? And why do our law enforcement keep blaming a group that we don't really see all that often? I get it. Deadliest makes sense. But what about the report on the far left? When are we going to talk about the fact that it's now been almost a year and they're once again attacking the courthouse? People need to know this. During the winter, rioters dip out. It's rainy, it's cold, it's wet, it's dark. And they don't want to go out during that. Protests and riots tend not to happen when it rains. You'll see a big rally. I've covered protests for a long time. I used to cover them for the most part. I don't anymore. You'll see this massive call for a riot or a protest. And then all of a sudden it'll rain and no one will show up because nobody wants to go outside in the rain. It's interesting how that works, right? So in winter, things slow down. And now that things are starting to warm up, we can expect it to get a whole lot worse. The far left is going to go around starting fires again. And Joe Biden is now the president. And I don't believe he has the strength to do anything with it. A lot of people were hoping Kamala Harris would be that figure. that Kamala Harris was effectively the tough cop who was going to lock all these people up. They really believed it, but she was quite literally the one trying to bail them out. No, it serves their purpose and their agenda. They'll find a way to blame Trump and Republicans for it, or they'll just outright ignore it. And a lot of people who just don't read the news will believe every single bit. And we will be all worse off for it. I think it's going to get pretty rowdy this year. I think we're going to see a lot of Antifa far-left violence, and I think you should be prepared for it. Expect it. I don't know. You got to do what you do to feel comfortable, to feel safe. But I hear more and more of these stories about liberals buying guns. I was one of them. Now I am a gun owner, and then some, to say the least. I think so long as the police are being defunded, demoralized, and the riots are expanding, escalation is just on its way. So I hope things calm down. I hope Portland gets a hold of things. Maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe Biden will turn around and arrest these people. But pardon me if I just do not believe it. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.